Our first panelist will be Renee Shamlou. She has been active in the animal welfare community since 2008. From Director of Operations for Ace of Hearts Dog Rescue to her latest position as Shelter Manager for the National Cat Protection Society, Renee has been finding homes for unwanted pets for a decade. As a graduate of California Western School of Law, Renee utilizes her legal skills to promote animal advocacy, including putting an end to animal suffering and creating innovative programs for shelters. Let's give it up for Renee.
Hi everyone, I'm Renee. All right, so I just want to give you a little bit of background about myself. So like everyone here, I'm an animal lover and I've always have been. Thank you. But I didn't think of it as anything more than just I loved animals and that was it. So naturally, I went to law school and I interned for a lot of organizations that are actually here today. And I realized I can make a career out of this, so I pursued that dream. And I've been working with animals for a little over a decade now in numerous capacities. I started out as a volunteer, went to Director of Dog Rescue, Shelter Manager. And with each new experience, I repeatedly ran into different situations that constantly made me reevaluate whether it's actually possible to make an impact in the number of cats and dogs that enter the shelter system. What especially led to doubts in my mind was seeing people play God in determining what animals they're going to take into the shelters, which ones they're going to euthanize, which ones they're going to adopt out. So I'm going to be taking a much more theoretical approach in addressing this issue, which I think is necessary, but it's also frustrating because there's no immediate resolution. And I'll start by posing some questions that I definitely don't have the answer to, nor do I suspect I will ever find the answers to. But I pose them to you so we can kind of take a step back to see how we can put an end to, or at least limit, the amount of domestic animals that enter our shelters each year. So the questions I have for you are, who the hell are you? Who the hell am I? And what the hell do we do about it? So humans have this God complex where we believe we are superior to all. The world is created for us. Specifically, animals are here for our needs. They're here for us to eat, to have as a companion, for our entertainment. Even though the DSM doesn't recognize the human God complex as a disease, I think it should. This concept has led to exploitation of every possible resource that the earth has to offer, and I think it's closely tied to why we have so many domestic animals in our shelters in the first place. Now, by no means do I agree that animals are for human use, but I also recognize that domestic animals were actually created by people for people. Humans are the ones that domesticated dogs and cats in the first place. We desired specific qualities, specific breeds, and so we kept breeding them to get that. To just put a little bit of perspective, the ASPCA estimates that 6.5 million companion animals enter our shelters each year. 1.7 million are euthanized. Only about 700,000 are actually returned to their owners. And these are actually a decrease in numbers, which I find fascinating. Like, how much higher could it get? But despite the problems we've created by breeding our pets, we selfishly continue to want Labradoodles and Persian cats instead of, looking at the personality of an animal, and we reject the ones that don't meet our definitions of cute, whatever that is. So in the beginning of my career, my neighborhood council animal welfare committee joined with the LA Services animal shelter, and we went to an elementary school to do some humane education, and we brought some animals there to show like the kids how you play with animals, how you treat them, spay, neuter, all that good stuff. And after the presentation, one of the animal control members, she pulled me aside, we were having a conversation, and she was telling me how kitten season's in full force, and she just had about 30 kittens come into the shelter the other day. And she, quote, picked the cutest ones and then killed the rest. And this really made me angry. I mean, who are you? Like, who are you to make that decision? I understand that she might not have a choice. Maybe her superior told her that she had to do it. But who are they to make that decision? Now, I'm not naive in my understanding of what goes on in kill shelters. I understand that it's not possible at this moment to keep them all. But I was just taken aback by how arbitrary the decision was on what cats live and which ones die, and what makes her think that she has the power to make that decision. Now, despite my judgment of her, I confess that I became guilty of this mindset once I actually entered the shelter system myself. Ace of Hearts, I was the director there. We were a foster-based bully breed rescue. So we did a lot of pit bulls, American bulldogs. And because we were foster-based, we didn't have a facility, which meant our work days were like 16 hours. And then we had an emergency cell phone where fosters can contact us. So it was exhausting. After a few years, it really started to wear down on me. And my perspective shifted from, what dogs can I help the most to which dogs are going to be the easiest to adopt out. Which ones are the cutest, who's the friendliest, who's not too hyper, who's not too large. I was making a judgment, and that judgment essentially saved a life, or it led to the destruction of another because we were pulling from high-kill shelters. I understand I can't save them all, but my point is, who am I to make that judgment? And a similar pattern arose at the shelter that I was currently working at, the National Cat Protection Society. They're called NatCat. It's an Orange County-based cat shelter that specializes in surrendered cats, not strays. And we didn't face the same struggles because we had a facility, so we can actually keep them, and they were well funded, so we could keep the cats as long as we needed. But every day I was given at least 200 stories about how I'm moving, I can't keep my cat, or if there's a death in the family, can you take my cat? And part of me wanted to take them all. I mean, after all, that's what I'm here for. I'm the shelter manager. I'm in this role to help the animals. But I knew that a lot of these cats were not going to be easily adoptable, at least not without a huge investment on the part of our staff, because they didn't fit the mold of what the OC patron was looking for. Maybe their coloring wasn't right, or they were a little fat, or they weren't lap cats. I remember taking in this beautiful blue-eyed chocolate point Siamese who would gouge your eyes out if you tried to touch her back. And we also had this munchkin cat that would maul anyone that pet her for too long. But these difficult cats got adopted the same day they became available, which boggles my mind. And why is that? I think it's because of their breed. The public wants this cute, exotic animal, despite the fact that there's perfectly healthy American bulldogs that we had, or black cats that we had. So I actually found myself catering to that, which is really disappointing. But many times I had to stop and ask myself, who am I to make that decision of who to save? Because I knew that whoever I didn't take in was going to end up at the kill shelter down the street. So how do we get to this point where it's not about the public at large, but the focus is on the fact that every animal deserves a chance? Is that even possible when domestic animals were originally intended to be for the use of the public, or that the law views animals as property and not beings? The shelter manager prior to me at NatCat, she was a bleeding heart and nowhere close as jaded as I was. So she took in a lot of cats, at least 50 that we didn't have room for. And a lot of these cats were here for a long time because they had a lot of issues, personality issues. But within 4 months of me taking over NatCat, I got them all adopted. And my point is to show that it's possible to find homes for even unlikely animals. There are other people out there that are like-minded. But I also recognize that Ace of Hearts and NatCat were private organizations. They were well-funded, so they had the resources to take in these animals and keep them. And that's obviously not the case for a lot of city and county shelters. So what do we do about that? Now, as an animal welfare committee, we know the script on how to help. Spay and neuter, adopt, don't shop, microchip, educate the community, understand the responsibility of owning a pet. On a micro level, that is absolutely necessary, and it's effective. But I don't think it solves the issue of why we have the issue in the first place. How do we step outside of ourselves and realize we are no better than any other creature on Earth? How do we change the mindset that animals are beings and not property that can be given up anytime there's an inconvenience in our lives? Let's say, for argument's sake, that humans actually are superior and we have a right to exercise dominion over animals. But shouldn't that ability actually impose a duty to protect animals instead of take advantage of them? So as I mentioned before, I don't have answers to any of these questions. And I don't know if it's possible to even make it happen given the God complex that kind of permeates our world. But I hope in sharing my experiences with you, we can start to reframe our goal and the path to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next, we'll hear from Cher Bond. the president of CARES, California Animal Rescue and Education Sanctuary. In 1993, she founded Skunks, specializing in doing skunk rescue and rehabilitation. In 2005, she started focusing more on domestic, exotic, and farm animal rescue and built a sanctuary for those unwanted animals in Lancaster, California. Her group does regular adoptions at PetSmart in Palmdale. They have programs such as Neighborhood Watch for Animals, Animal Crime Watch, etc. Share good wild orangutan behavior and rehabilitation of ex-captive babies in Borneo. She has taught at seminars around the nation and different classes at previous AR conferences. She writes regular newspaper articles, gives advice on dealing with nuisance wildlife, and how to properly care for companion animals. One of her published books will be available for purchase to help raise funds for her animal rescue work, An Earth Divided, Crucified for Caring. Cher is also a vegan and an avid animal advocate, as you can see at this conference. Take it away, Cher.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
It is. Everyone can hear me? The talk is about abuse of animal companions, and they wanted to focus more on homeless animals, which is really difficult because I think it's more important to go into why the animals become homeless and what kind of situations create that. Our community, where our sanctuary is a lower income area per capita with problems such as backyard breeding, non-neutered animals, even though there are many free spay and neuter programs, animals running loose, abandonment, people dump the animals in the desert, they're left in homes and yards without food or water when they're evicted or incarcerated, or they're taken to animal control or animal rescues, which are overflowing with animals because they don't want to pay for grooming, dental problems, training, fixing their fences, or costs that come with senior animals. There's a lot of neglect. So we have a program, Animal Crime Watch, and a lot of cruelty in our area. There's improper housing, keeping animals outside in the extreme elements, starving animals, ungroomed animals, laziness where no lost and found signs are posted, very simple things that people can do. Cruelty, a lot of animal fighting. We've helped shut down 2 cockfighting and a pit bull fighting ring with the help of a lot of other people. A lot of stealing from yards of purebred animals. They see a purebred dog that they want, and then they turn around and sell them. And if people don't put signs up, then they don't get their dogs back. Tossing animals out of moving vehicles. We've actually gotten 40 animals in that situation. Walking dogs out on hot pavement. We have an educational thing where we hand them to people. And if that doesn't work, we just knock them down, take their shoes, make them run back, through when they're bare feet on the pavement. No, I'm just kidding. There have been quite a few cases of people pouring acid on animals. So there's a lot of crazy people out there as well. Leaving animals in hot vehicles, illegal fireworks, which we have a campaign protest going on for the next 3 days. When you add non-neutering with abandonment, what you end up with is wild feral animals and pack attacks. People, small pets, and farm animals have been killed or injured, and a lot of our animals have been killed, so we had to spend a lot of money to protect our sanctuary. The list goes on and on. Our organization deals with every one of these situations. But just taking on unwanted and unclaimed animals, getting them fixed, microchipped, and vaccinated really isn't enough because people populations are growing and so are the animals. They're allowing people to take in more animals now, and it's just increasing the problem. So more has to be done. I want to talk about why animals become homeless. Breeders can't sell the imperfect ones. There's actually cases where there was a 3-legged, what's the popular bulldog?
English?
No, I think the other well, one of the popular bulldogs,
French bulldog.
a breeder, and one was born with 3 legs, and they dumped it in the dumpster behind the restaurant. And luckily, the people that worked there found it and found a home for it. Animals not neutered escape to breed. Owners don't make enough effort to keep them contained. Abandonment, because of fear of fireworks, many other reasons. Strays are a great concern with dogs. It's mostly rabies, attack of people and their animals, causing car accidents, property damage, and whether they're lost, concern about the animals. With cats, overpopulation, poor management by some feral cat people. Are there any feral cat people, managers in here? Very well-meaning. We have a TNR plus, which is trap, neuter, return, and the plus part is so it doesn't have a negative impact on wildlife. Defecating in people's yards, causing barkings of dogs. Who are the people who abandon their animals? Well, I'm taking situation out where I am, but they're generally lower income, uneducated, and some people that have a different philosophy about animals. Backyard breeding is to raise money. Non-neutered animals because they don't have the money, time, transportation, or care to get them fixed. Animals running loose because they can't afford to or even care to fix their fences and their gates. Children and workers aren't being taught the importance of keeping doors and gates secured or posting instructions. So dumping in the desert because it's too inconvenient or expensive to take to a shelter. They charge money to drop animals off. And if you find 6 kittens, that's $60. A lot of people don't have that. So it's a lot more convenient to just dump them in the desert. But abandonment can happen in any community, not just with the poor. Common cases of animal neglect and cruelty. When we generally think of neglect, what comes to mind is no food, water, or shelter. But what we're finding as rescues is that not grooming, no teeth cleaning, or senior care is a common cause of abandonment. You wouldn't believe how many people say, that little dog right there, Najee, a Shih Tzu, purebred Shih Tzu, he was running the streets loose, horribly matted, nails about 2 inches long. It's unbelievable that it would happen with any animal. Teeth cleaning, we get animals in with, they've never had any teeth cleaning, and their teeth have to be pulled. They have rotten breath. People don't want them anymore. Seniors, all the expenses that they anticipate. Or they take them to the vet and they find out that, oh my God, it's going to cost $1,500 so let's just get rid of him. A term I've really learned to despise. We all know what animal cruelty is, but we consider these cases criminal neglect. It's kind of in between the two. It's most common. What cases we've had to deal with, and I wish I had before and after pictures. Next time I'll do that. But I think I can describe them pretty vividly. We get animals in that are so matted. There was an old English sheepdog that actually, they used this big, thick fur area on his neck as a leash. You could see the hole, that it was a leash, and they just let him around. We got 7 matted Maltipus, and they were so bad you couldn't tell the head from the tail, whether they were male or female, and the football-sized mats on them. It made the dog look 3 times bigger than they were. And the matting actually was pulling the skin apart, actually ripping the skin. And then not getting an animal's teeth cleaned causes heart disease. It's just more education that people need. There's a lot of hoarding cases. We work with animal control, and rather than just taking people that have excessive animals or they're hoarders or they just are feeding the desert dogs or whatever, now instead of taking them, and a lot of them aren't even fit to be, they can't be trained. So what kind of a situation would they have other than euthanasia? So they're willing to, as long as we take them and get them spayed, neutered, and he keeps them contained and fed, then they're willing to let him keep the animals. So as far as illegal fireworks, I don't think I have to go into detail on that. But a lot of people don't realize that there's more than just the cats and dogs, and it's not as simple as keeping them in your house. You can't put a thunder shirt. You can't put a thunder shirt on a horse or your pigs or your chickens and stuff like that. So there's farm animals that are being affected by the fireworks. We get calls all the time with owls that are blown out of the sky. They don't even think about that. They're just thinking about just their immediate dogs. So we really do have to stop fireworks entirely. And the solutions that we found that work are adding an animal program to existing neighborhood watch programs, because while they're out there looking for crime and so forth, they can watch for strays, neglect, and cruelty. Assistance by getting pets fixed, microchipped, transport to the vet, free consultations on how to keep their animals on their property. It's really not hard. Teach feral cat groups how not to have a negative impact on wildlife. Just slight adjustments. More rescues, fosters, and sanctuaries. Getting the laws changed and enforced. We have great laws. Nobody's enforcing them. That's really, we have to stay on top of them. Especially regarding the fireworks and everything else. There's never enough education. We have to just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I find that in cases where it's really extreme cruelty or neglect, if you take advantage of that, then in the media, then you can get the message out to millions of people, which I know they do in all the cases here as well. But so another thing is a lot of people lose their homes to foreclosure or their rental house because they lost their job or taken quickly when incarcerated. So contingency plans need to be made for the proper care of their animals in emergency or death. And how much time? 3 minutes. I wanted to finish with a poem. You think I have time? You might cry. Okay, but it kind of tells everything I'm talking about. I adopted your dog today, the one you left at the pound, the one you had for 10 years and no longer wanted around. I got to keep from crying. I adopted your dog today. I don't know if I can do this. Did you know that he's lost weight? Did you know he's scared and depressed and seems to have lost all faith? I adopted your dog today. He had fleas and a little cold. Guess you didn't care what shape he's in. You abandoned him, I'm told. I adopted your dog today. Were you having a baby or moving away? Did you suddenly develop allergies, or was there no reason he couldn't stay? I adopted your dog today. He doesn't play or even eat much. I guess he's very sad inside, and it'll take him some time to trust. I adopted your dog today, and here he is to stay. He found his forever home and a warm bed in which to lay. I abandoned your dog today and shall give him all he will need, patience, love, and security, so he can forget your selfish deed. It's me every time.
Thank you for sharing. That was beautiful. So our next panelist here, Alicia Corpio. She's the founder and president of Space Coast Animal Rights and the global hashtag Not Just for Easter campaign, an initiative that aims to end the sale of animals given at Easter. With the inspiration of her first rabbit, Senora Floppers, Alicia leads a very busy life, leading the way for animal rights in Brevard County, Florida. With the little time she has away from managing SCAR and hashtag Not Just for Easter, Alicia enjoys working toward her master's degree in nonprofit management and spending time with her husband Matt and 3 rabbits, Scotch, Sky, and Herman. Let's give it up for Alicia.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I can't see the screen. It's okay. Oh, yeah, I need the mic. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am a rabbit-obsessed person. I've been doing rabbit rescue for over 10 years now, and I have 3 rescue bunnies of my own. One is with us today, Kermit, in the pink stroller back there. So he will be at our booth for most of the day, too, so come on by and say hi to him. He has an Instagram page called Kermit the Bunny as well, and that's a picture of him in the first slide. Basically, I chose to talk about this issue because a lot of people forget about small mammals, as well as other exotic animals. That's just reptiles and fish, and I could go on and on for like hours on it. So I chose to focus only on small mammals. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is just an overview of what we'll be talking about. So you get a quick look at that. And then I'll jump right in. Our starter pet label. I understand pet is not a good word, but however, that's how a lot of these terms are said. So I'm going to go ahead and use it, but in the future, please use the words companion animal. Unfortunately, all these small mammals tend to have a label called starter pets. There's absolutely no such thing as a starter pet. All animals, all companion animals deserve the same kind of love and commitment. And actually, a lot of people just assume these animals won't live very long. So they assume that their lives are meaningless compared to a dog or a cat. These animals are, like I said, just as much of a commitment. A lot of people will get these animals to teach responsibility to their children. However, that is not the job of an animal. That's your job. So please do not use an animal to teach your child anything. Next is a big problem with this is a lot of people don't properly take the time to learn how to care for these animals because they see them as disposable and starter animals. They don't see them as a commitment. So they won't take the time to really do the research they need to do. So unfortunately, that causes a lot of illness issues and essentially death. As for example, rabbits have extremely sensitive stomachs and they can't even process carrots for the most part. A lot of people think, oh, let me give a bunny a bunch of carrots. And actually, if a rabbit stops eating, he has 24 hours before he will die. So these animals have very specific, care requirements that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to. On top of that, there's a problem with uneducated vets. A lot of vets will take the time to learn about cats and dogs because they're the animals mostly coming in, but they'll take very little courses on small mammals. And a lot of times they'll make decisions that will actually cause a lot of havoc in the future. So we fully recommend that you find a vet that really, really, really knows what they're doing because it can, our rabbit Floppers, who's our first rabbit, she actually ended up dying because I took her to a vet who didn't know how to properly spay and neuter. And she developed an insane infection and head tilt, and she ended up dying pretty painfully no matter how hard we tried to keep her alive. So that was very hard for us to deal with. On top of that, these animals are typically predators. Even the carnivorous of these animals, they are still seen as predators, as prey animals, and they have to deal with the issue of predators. On top of that, they could get very nervous very quickly. So the instability of having kids around these animals typically are not good because they get very nervous as far as that goes. So, come on. Oh, I was pressing the wrong thing. Okay. Breeders are a huge issue. Obviously, especially backyard breeders, they see these animals as objects, and there's really not enough rules in place to really regulate these breeders. Like I said, they see these animals as machines, not being their money makers. A lot of times they'll sell them not just as companion animals, but also for meat purposes. So they really don't care where these animals end up typically. Their living conditions while in their care are horrible, very filthy, the wrong kind of, a lot of times these animals are kept outside when they're actually not supposed to be outside whatsoever as far as keeping a companion. They're too domesticated to survive being outside, especially in a tiny, dirty hutch. Separation too early is also a big issue. And these animals, there's absolutely no screening for the people who come in to buy these animals. So they're often given to unfit caretakers who end up abandoning them to the shelter very soon after anyway, because they have no idea how to properly take care of these animals. And then this leads me to the issue of abandonment. In the background, you can see that bunny actually is an abandoned Easter bunny I found in the woods in a park near us, and him and his brother were loose in there. We had to go climb through vines and stuff to try to save him. Unfortunately, his brother ended up dying very shortly of pneumonia because he was outside in just very horrible living conditions. But he is doing really well right now, and I think he's actually available for adoption now. So if you are interested and you're anywhere near Florida, let me know. But anyway, like these animals, like I said, are seen as disposable animals. They're not seen as a real commitment. So often they're just thrown out into the woods or thrown out into the shelter. No one seems to care. Also, a lot of people, they just assume domesticated animals are the same as wild animals as far as like rabbits and stuff like that. So they think they're going to survive, whereas there's no way. These animals do not know how to survive in the wild. Another big issue is the breeders will, after they can't sell the rabbits and they get to a certain age, a lot of breeders will just release these animals into the wild or bring them to shelters. So it's just a really that's where we think this rabbit came from, was a breeder, like was a rabbit that the breeder couldn't sell, so it was dumped into the woods. I've also found rabbits running around downtown areas. I had to save one about a month ago that was running around in front of a bar on the intersection of an extremely busy road. So that was extremely scary. It took 4 of us to save him. Another issue, obviously, as I discussed before, is predators, inclement weather, scarce food. They don't really know how to rummage for the right kind of food. And then animal control really typically does very little. A lot of times they don't really know the laws about this. They know about the laws with dogs and cats and extremely exotic animals, but they don't typically know how to deal with the small mammal issues. So it's up to the rescues to actually do something about this. Recently, it got a lot of publicity in Las Vegas. There's a feral rabbit colony, and basically somebody went in and killed a bunch of them. They all died from blunt force trauma. So a bunch of rescues all over the country and Canada got together and started getting them all over to get adopted. Unfortunately, though, that got really big publicity, which is good for them, but this is happening all over the country and other countries. This is not an isolated incident. This is just, they got the publicity out there to make a difference for them. But this is happening all over the place. I mean, I live very close to Orlando, and there's a huge feral colony out there, and there's absolutely not enough help whatsoever. So, is the issue of shelter negligence, and I'm going to talk about this because my rabbit Kermit, who's here today, I ended up adopting him simply because the shelter was not taking care of him. He was at a no-kill shelter. I'm not going to say the name of the shelter, although I want to. And they had him caged inside a tiny, tiny cage. Like you can see, this is actually in the background, one of the rabbits at their shelter right now, in a tiny cage, in bedding that's extremely toxic to both rabbits and guinea pigs. They also had chinchillas and hedgehogs. And I went in once a week to check on these animals because I was not in a position to adopt, but I was trying to encourage the shelter to make a difference. And every time I went in, another one of these small mammals were dead. And it was really horrible. And then Kermit was this really loving rabbit that's had a sign on his cage saying, "Mean, do not open the cage." But he's never bit. He's never scratched. He's always been the most I'm not even sure he's a rabbit because he loves people and he hates rabbits. So like, I was just like, it's just mind-boggling. And he has this really, really bad eye infection. They have multiple vets on staff, but the vets refuse to work on rabbits in any single way whatsoever. Even though a lot of times the way to treat a dog and a cat can work on a rabbit, like especially with eye issues. Like it was just like an eye infection, and they wouldn't do anything about it. It kept getting worse and worse. I was displaced by Hurricane Irma at the time. I'm really at low income because this is my job and I don't really make money. And I told them all of this, how we were living in a hotel. We had 2 other rabbits, and they said I could take him for only $10, which is extremely scary because the rabbits at the store cost a lot more than $10. So you have the problem of people who feed their animals. Like if they have snakes, they'll feed these small mammals to them, and they'll go to shelters because the shelters don't do enough screening, and they'll get these animals for so much cheaper than they would at a pet store. So it's a huge issue that shelters, not only do they not know how to properly take care of the animals, typically they don't care enough to even do the research to do it right, let alone set proper adoption and screening fees. So that's a really huge issue. Another thing is, like, they're also seen as unadoptable, which is why they don't take the time. So a lot of times if they go into a kill shelter, they're the first ones killed very quickly. And then a lot of no-kill shelters will actually refuse them coming in because they don't want to deal with housing a rabbit or a small mammal for too long. And then we're going to jump into overcrowding and rescues. Yeah. So this video wasn't loading well, so we had to move it over time, but it looks like it got kicked out anyway, so hopefully we can just get it to play. Otherwise, I could just talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to talk as it was, but, oh, that's way too loud. Whatever. So basically, this is from an animal shelter or a rabbit rescue in Gainesville. They currently have over 100 rabbits in their care at this just one rabbit rescue. And this is their bunny barn where they keep a good amount of their rabbits because they don't have enough volunteers and people willing to foster. Because a lot of people don't even know about these issues and they're willing to foster a bunch of dogs and cats rather than these small mammals. So they have to always deal with this kind of thing where they have a ton of animals coming in and nothing, like nowhere to put them. You know, like if you're familiar with cat and dog rescues, a lot of them will say, well, we're overfilled, we have a waiting list of 2 weeks. Rabbit rescues, especially after Easter, their waiting list is more like 6 to 9 months. So that's an extreme issue, and we just put that kind of cute video together. So let me jump back here. So that's a really big issue. These small mammal rescues really, really, really need your help. So if you have the space and the time, please go to a rabbit rescue, guinea pig rescue, ferret rescue, and do something, like help them out because they need it. A lot of, in fact, a lot of these rabbits will die in rescue. I had one that I volunteered at a shelter with. He ended up dying in rescue. He was in rescue for over 5 years. No one would take him. And then there's the issue of problematic laws. It's not clicking. Maybe if you could just click the thing. No, it's just the full thing. Press the presentation button again.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so problematic laws, we already talked about how there's not enough protection for these animals. Also, with rabbits in particular, they're seen as agricultural animals, despite the fact that they're the 3rd most popular pet in the United States and the UK and Canada. So they get the same kind of care as an agriculture animal, not necessarily, like a guinea pig has more rights in this country than a rabbit. Where am I? There's local bans in certain places. Like, for instance, somebody is throwing out their ferrets years and years ago in New York City, And now ferrets aren't even allowed in New York City. So that's like, it gives them this bad stigmatization on how they really are. And then there's the issue of this virus being released in Australia, UK, and Canada. And there is there's a vaccine for it for domesticated rabbits, but Australia refuses to give it to the rabbits because they think they're just going to dump them and then they'll be immune to this virus. But it's an extremely bad poisoning, and it's just really, really awful thing that people are dealing with. Another big issue is classroom pets. Just one more. Can I have one more minute on top of that? Okay, so classroom pets. A lot of teachers will bring them in to try to teach the kids commitment, but they're actually not. They're not taught as a commitment because these animals typically will go home with a new kid every week. And also they live in a classroom, which is not the kind of care that they would be living in a home. So they're seen as a project, and really it's just purposeless. There's absolutely no reason to have these animals in a classroom. I'm going to talk about holidays real quick, and because I'm out of time, we're going to skip the Hollywood part. But I'm sure you guys understand Hollywood hypes up these animals, and then there's like a swarm of people buying them from pet stores and then abandoning them once they don't know. A big issue, obviously, is gifts. These animals, because they're small and not seen as a commitment, they're given for birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, all kinds of reasons. And a lot of times I get somebody telling me that they didn't even want an animal, but their boyfriend thought it would be cute to give them an animal for their anniversary. So that happens a lot. Now, my specialty is what I deal with not just for Easter, is the fact that these animals flood in during Easter, including chicks and ducklings as well. And they need extra support. So what our campaign does is we work to end the exploitation of these animals. So this doesn't continue as an issue. And then my last slide is how to help. Please go to one of these rescues, offer to adopt, foster, volunteer, donate, or educate. Just do at least one of these things. Advocate for these animals. If you see that somebody is not properly taking care of these animals, say something and educate them. Educate shelters. If you go into a shelter and you see that they're not properly taking care of small mammals, go get with the executive director, get with the shelter manager, and make them listen to you. Report any kind of abuse. If animal control doesn't want to help you, contact your local rescue. Go home today and go look up wherever you live and what a wild rabbit looks like where you live. And if you see an animal that looks any different than this wild animal, do something to save them, because they will not survive outside. Do not just assume they're wild. And then finally, please join our campaign. We have a sign-up sheet at our table in the Century Foyer for people who want to sign up to do an action for not just for Easter 2019, as well as we have a petition and a few things for sale. So we could really use like the donations and stuff like that to keep this going. So, and that's all I got. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. This how to help slide is so helpful and tangible. Oh no, it's fine. I love that. And just kind of like not assuming that shelters know what they are doing, you know? And also just because it says no kill, you're like, you immediately might think that that's good, but that's often not good, because then they might leave an animal without proper care in the same cage for years and years and years, instead of cycling them through. So obviously that's a whole other issue, and the companion animal issues are broad. We heard from a lot of different areas within that whole issue area today, but we still didn't cover a lot of things, obviously, because there's just so much information. So now we'll open it up to Q&As. If you can just line up at the microphone right there, be sure to speak into the mic. We'll be recording this session, and please keep your questions concise. That way we can get to as many discussions as possible. Great, please.
Thank you very much. You're all heroes in my mind, so thank you so much for the work you're doing with companion animals. I am the dad of 2 rabbits, and Alicia, thank you. You gave a brilliant overview and what the work you and your husband do and as investors.
Thanks. Ask him for pictures of his rabbits. They're adorable.
Yeah. Brooklyn Beacon on I'm a volunteer also in New York City at animal care centers, and rabbits are kind of lost in the cracks there. And I'm getting to a question, and we had probably one of the biggest rabbit cruelty cases that went to court. We had a woman who was a hoarder who was caught with hundreds of rabbits, and she was found guilty of 120 or something counts of animal cruelty. She got 30 days in jail, which many applauded as something. Many of us were very, very disappointed. And the predominant narrative on social media, and I was just crucified because I don't support the rights of hoarders. I don't believe that rehabilitation currently works. And somehow in the whole process of this, it became about the rights of the abuser. And it became about the rehabilitation, so-called rehabilitation for a person who had no interest in being rehabilitated. We need to send clear messages that there are very clear ramifications for animal abuse, especially for rabbits and other small animals that are just completely lost in the cracks. So where do we stand on this issue of, I believe people need to go to jail for the work for this that they do. And I know that that's unpopular with some, but until that time, they will keep doing it. That woman has rabbits again. We know this, right? And then it will take years to get this prosecuted, right?
Yeah.
So where do we go here?
Okay, so basically these issues happen everywhere in your hometown. Go speak to your representatives, make them listen, bring the facts. Do more grassroots activism to get the education out there. Speak with your local shelters about what they can do to help educate people properly. Unfortunately, like I said, rabbits are seen as agriculture animals. They don't have the same kind of rights as other domestic animals in this country. So it's a very hard thing to deal with. And we need to be doing more to get them seen as domesticated animals and not agriculture animals. Now, obviously, we don't want agriculture animals to be treated the way they are, but in the mindset of speciesism in this country, rabbits really need to start having the same rights as dogs, cats, guinea pigs, etc. And I mean, this issue goes beyond small mammals. In my hometown recently, somebody dragged a pit bull behind their truck, and they only got 6 weeks in jail or a fine. They paid the fine and were out of jail the next day. So and the fine was like something like $1,500. It was nothing. So, it's just, we have to keep talking to lawmakers. We have to keep writing letters, doing petitions, and just like getting the word out there. And that's really the best we could do at this moment.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
I just want to add to that. Our laws view all animals as property. So no matter what you do, as long as that mindset is out there, it's not going to make a difference. So that it's really cumbersome to change that, but I think that is the ultimate issue. Until animals are viewed as beings in the eyes of the law, then these cases of animal cruelty will be nothing more than a slap on the hand and maybe a few weeks in jail and you're out. So I think that's like a big issue in enforcing these punishments because they're the same value as a chair or a table.
Yeah. And then one more thing is also, there's groups like the Animal Legal Defense Fund that are trying to define animals as beings rather than objects and property. So support those kinds of organizations that are using their legal skills to actually make a difference and change the terms for these animals.
First of all, thank you. We're having to get out here with the animals and inspiring to a little bit actually take action. I might just have a question, more like an idea. I live in LA County, and I live around my own place right now with this family, and I'm fortunate enough that my manager, they don't care if we have animals. But wherever I want to go to, most of the time, they don't allow pets. And I feel that's like the foundation, one of the many reasons why these animals are not being adopted out, because these tenants or these managers, they don't allow us to have animals. And I don't know if there's laws, or we can actually start and create a law throughout the whole country where they allow pets. It's like, why not? Okay, yeah, they sometimes can't, or we can pick it up. Or, I don't know, I really don't know. Since I love animals, I really don't know why they don't allow pets. Maybe because they bark, or
they're no worse than children.
Right.
So, yeah.
Country where it's just like the norm for like, yeah, just a lot. And so mine's not even a question, I don't know, it's like an idea. Do you guys know why or how?
I mean, I know why this happens is because, I mean, I've had to deal with it a lot having rabbits. A lot of people don't want rabbits in the house because they assume that they're not going to be taken care of properly because of people in the past not taking care of it properly. But there's people moving into these places with kids that are not taken care of properly or causing the same amount of damage. So it makes absolutely no sense. And I like to point that out to the apartment complexes that I've moved 15 times in the past 10 years. So like I've had this conversation a ton of times. So, I mean, I think the best thing is to educate these apartment communities or these landlords and just try to make them understand that, you know, I properly take care of my animal, and this animal is going to cost a lot less damage than a lot of the kids in your property. So I would just point that out.
Thank you.
Hiya. I live in Joshua Tree, which is on the other side of Mojave from Lancaster. And I currently have 8 dogs because of the problem of jumping out in the desert and not spaying and neutering and things such as that. My friend has a rescue and predominantly pit bulls because our shelters don't take pit bulls. And if they're too overcrowded, they won't take dogs at all. And then they get dumped out in the desert. So my question is for you to, like, how do you get funded for, like, I know they were talking about micro sanctuaries over there and stuff. Like, I have 8 dogs. I don't plan on getting any more dogs, but I keep picking them up out of the desert. So, like, my friend got a 501c3. Is that the first thing to go through, or is there some kind of micro sanctuary for domestic animals?
Well, you can be an animal rescue without being a nonprofit. There are advantages to being a nonprofit if you have a good enough team of people, because it's a lot of work writing grants and so forth, but you can get a lot of help with grants.
Yeah, because currently I have a dog that I found a vet, where my vet is letting me make payments. He had a $5,000 knee surgery, and now I have the little dog that got thrown out of a car that was probably a breeding dog, and he was 7 pounds, and he has half of his teeth missing, and he has inflamed gums, and I don't have the money to take him to get the extractions. We got him on antibiotics, and I'm very careful about what he eats and everything, but I have to wait until I pay off the knee surgery to get his dental work done. So, like, trying to get funding for these, and my boxer that I found out in the desert had a broken jaw. So, like, you know, like, all these issues, and there's really no place for me to go to, like, if I need to drop it off at a rescue or anything, but they're all full. All the shelters are full. There's no help. I have called shelters. I've called, like, Marlene Mutz to hatch me. I've called everyone. They don't call you back. They don't return my emails. They don't return any of my messages because they're probably full too.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is to be a foster.
I've done 2 GoFundMes, and it's getting played out because nobody wants, like, after a couple GoFundMes, they don't want to fund you anymore, you know. I found a dog, and I got her leg amputated because she had cancer, and I raised that money in a week. But then the next person.
Okay, would you like to hear the answer?
Yes.
Okay. There's very little money. There's really no money to be made in a rescue, unless you have a huge team of people that are really willing to dedicate to it. I mean, one person can't do it alone, and I know a lot that try. You might want to become a foster, and with, like, if there's a PetSmart or Petco out in your area, find out who the rescues are that use that venue, and they're usually you have to be a nonprofit, and foster for them, and then they can help you get food they can help you with the spay and neuter, but then those dogs are technically theirs. And then you get the dogs to the adoption event. They have to be spayed, neutered, and rabies, and all the things you have to do to get them adopted. And they'll do the house checks and so forth. That's the easiest thing to do but then again, when the adoption is done, then they keep the money because they've spent all the money, getting that done. And that's the only thing I can think of. There are different places where you can get funding, like Actors and Others, and you can call any vet. It's a good place to start because it sounds like you're in a different county.
Yeah.
And then ask them who does pledges, which nonprofits help with pledges, and they'll give you the numbers, and you call and they'll pay so much for spay and neuter. They'll pay so much for surgeries and things like that. You can also do GoFundMe's, but then again, you have to be a nonprofit to do that. So you really have to work with a nonprofit.
Yeah, I just want to add, doing it on your own is impossible. Like the nonprofit, the dog rescue that I was the operations manager for, the founder was loaded. So, because she had her own private business, that was the only way to fund the nonprofit. Like we would do grants, but that barely covered anything. Or we'd create relationships with vets. Like we'd take in a dog if you paid for the surgery and make those kind of relationships. But without that extra funding, there was no way we could have survived. So I really think working with a nonprofit is going to be essential for you to get these. I mean, I don't know if you want to keep them. I mean, I'm sure you love them as your own, but going in as a foster, I think, is a great idea. Yeah, so they're yours. Like they're family. But I know, like at Ace of Hearts, we paid our fosters. We would pay you every week. We provide everything for you, and then we would keep the adoption money to cover that. But the only way to do that was by having that funding. There's no way we could have done it alone.
Can I make a really quick comment? They're right. Working with rescues is the best way to do it. For us, because we're an outreach group, we're not a rescue. But a lot of times we capture these animals that are out in the woods and stuff like that in really at-risk situations like you do with the desert. And what we do is we use that to educate people, and then we work with multiple rescues in the state. And trust me, there's ones out there that care as much as you. You just need to keep digging. And like one rescue we work with is 3 hours away, but they send us what we need. And then once they get an opening, we bring the rabbit to them. So like working with you don't need to pick just one. You can work with multiple rescues. And then if you are accepting donations, keep in mind that multiple states do not allow you to take donations unless you're registered as a corporation with the state, as a nonprofit corporation. Usually this is pretty cheap and easy to do. So I recommend doing that at the very least, and maybe making a Facebook page called like Desert Dogs or something like that, just like get people coming in. And then, your funding will make more sense. You don't necessarily need a 501c3 to receive funding, but you do need a 501c3 to issue a receipt that's going to count as a tax exempt. So, and you do need a 501c3 to go in to PetSmart as an adoption partner and stuff like that, unless you're working with another rescue that is a 501c3.
Can you put that onto somebody else's?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. You just need to get them to agree.
Usually if you volunteer and things like that.
Exactly.
Get your foot in.
Yeah, and I would just add too, from what I've seen, like if you do start your own nonprofit organization, I mean, marketing is so important. So if you did start your own in Desert Dogs, that sounds really cool. And someone to make you like a little logo and a Facebook page. Already you're going to see more legitimate and credible. So folks will want to donate regularly, and then hopefully you have some volunteers, some like interns. Who can help you out and help with that like long-term transparency about like what you are able to accomplish with those donations, which is really encouraging to donors over time, because then they can see that and they can feel like they're part of the community, create little events, little vegan potlucks with anyone who's in the area, just all of those community building tactics like that we use in social justice organizing or even in starting a company, just like apply that to your animal rescue. And so kind of those may seem like distractions from helping the animals, but I think that that's going to like grow that and then give you what you need to have to sustain all of the rescues that you're
also doing outreach prevents this from happening. Like a lot of rescues, they don't have time to do the outreach. They only have time to do the rescue. So making yourself available to piggyback off rescues to get the dogs adopted, and then having the time to do outreach on the side would be really valuable, not just to the dogs, but to the rescues that are taking in these animals.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that is our time. Let's a round of applause for our panelists.